Hi, I'm Kevin Lachlan, owner of Wildside Nature Tours. I am so excited to be back in the Galapagos Islands. I've been here about 50 times now, and it's one of the most incredible places in the world. Welcome to our YouTube channel, full of our trip reports, travel videos, birding videos, and photo instruction.
Hey everyone, welcome to Wildside Nature Tours YouTube community. We're so glad you're a part. We are now going to be bringing you a lot more of our trip reports through a video format. One, you can actually hear directly from the mouths of the guides of each of our trips, our workshops, and that's going to be for our birding trips, our photography workshops, and our soon-to-come birdography workshops. So we've got a wide variety of trips we run. And I know a lot of people, not many people like to read a big, long thing. Some people still do, and we'll still have some written reports here and there. But we also think that for getting out images and sharing those with you and hearing from us about our trips will be a lot more exciting. So I'm excited to share with you. I'm joined with Dawn Wilson today. Hey, Dawn, how's it going? And she...
How you doing? I just landed.
That's
Sorry, we have
awesome.
a hospital nearby with the emergency helipad on it. So
Ah, really? Well, Dawn's also in Mountain Standard Time Zone, so the delay. No, I'm teasing. So Dawn accompanied me this year on our 2024 Peruvian Amazon Riverboat adventure, and it's the second year in a row that Dawn and I co-led this, and we're both photography instructors. So, we also have a birding aspect to that trip that was led by Scott Little and Edison Buenano, who are also part of the Wildside family. But we're going to share with you about the photography side and the photography skiff and some of our experiences. And we definitely had some big highlights on this trip. It's always it's an interesting photographic experience. I think Dawn would say the same in that there's a lot of subjects, but it can be challenging at times in terms of the photographic experience for a variety of reasons. Dawn, what's your thought about, photographing in the Amazon and your overall experience? You've done this twice now. I think that was my seventh trip. Why don't you tell everybody for a minute, since you're kind of newer to it than I am, what your experience has been like the past 2 years?
there are a couple things that were really big takeaways from this year in particular. So I've done it twice. Last year I went into it with no expectations. I knew it was the jungle, I knew it was the rainforest, and I knew it would be, warm and humid conditions. But other than that, I really wasn't sure what to expect. And it was just a mind-blowing experience on the diversity that's down there, how many things we would see in the course of one day. I feel pretty lucky to live in a place like Colorado where we do see a lot of wildlife on a daily basis,
Yeah.
but it's nothing in comparison to what you see down there. I mean, just between the primates and the reptiles and the bird life. And the other thing that was different this year compared to last year is that it was completely different. So this year I did have some expectations. I expected to see the sloths that we did every day. I expected to see some of the same birds. And this year it was completely different. We saw animals this year I didn't even know existed. It was, to see the tamarin and to see, we did see sloths this year, but not as many. Yet this year we saw a yellow crowned tree
Tree rat.
rat that I had no idea there was such a thing out there. And we
It's
saw
actually
what,
a
three
pretty
of them, I
rat.
think. Yeah, I mean it's kind of like a little chinchilla living in a cavity in a tree.
That's cool.
So it really, you think back to when we grew up and you learned about the rainforest and you learn about the diversity down there. It truly is very much that way. I mean, just every day is a little bit different. We go to a lot of different places, even though it's all the rainforest. Each place is a little bit different. The plant life's a little bit different. The thickness of the rainforest can be a little bit different. Each one of those areas can then harbor other different types of animals.
Yeah, I think for me, you said, you think because you're going to the same area and because some trips, like we know we're going to see black colored hawks all the time because of the way they behave, but every trip is so different. Some trips, some birds or animals are up close. Like the year before, I think we had 10 species of primates, and this year I think we had three or four. But this year we had hundreds of squirrel monkeys, way like to the point where if they were way off, sometimes we didn't even slow the boat down. You could hear them chirping off in the distance, which is always really cool. But we got one monkey that I had never got to photograph, even though I'd seen it down there before. We had I'm brain farting, Don, the black
The capuchin?
yeah, black capuchin. Yeah. That was hanging out twice. I think we had them hanging out with the squirrel monkeys. So, you know, if you've gone once, yeah, you've seen it, but you haven't seen it all. And every trip is very different for us. So, Don, why don't you start? What was one of the highlights that jumps out at you about this particular trip?
Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I mean, right off the top of my head, I think the spectacled owl was really special. We all know how difficult owls are to not just see, but to find. You know, owls tend to be nocturnal. This species of owl is no different. And so we not only found one, but we found one that was out in the middle of the day, down low enough for us to see it. And even though it was a little bit deep into the forest, you still could make it out. You still could see it. You could see it sitting there. And we took, you know, the group was phenomenal about taking one at a time. We each took an opportunity to see it and photograph it for a few minutes. I would say that was probably one of the coolest things on this trip.
Yeah.
What about you, Lee? I'm always curious to hear what you think is
I will
kind
tell
of a
you, of
highlight.
course, you know that I'm one of those, I love creepy crawlies. So you see me laying down on the ground. Everybody else is worried about the ants and all the other crap. And I got spines in my knee, getting shots, you know. I like getting up close and personal. And there were two things that really, I mean, there were more than two that really jump out at me. But one, when we made the bathroom stop in the little village, which is a stretch, I mean, you know, a couple of homes, right? And we found out that the locals had rescued or through a program that's sponsored by the government some yellow spotted Amazon river turtles, which are, you know, we don't really know exactly how threatened or endangered they are, but because of poachers taking them for food to sell in the food places for in markets for food. Well, this group, these kids brought out 14 of these baby turtles that we got to release. So for me, getting to put a baby turtle, which was about a photographic experience for me, I would have loved to have been able to photograph myself releasing it, but I haven't really figured out how to do that. I have T-Rex arms, so selfies don't work very well. But for me, that was one. And then, you know, one of our local guides, Caesar, who is unbelievable at spotting wildlife, found a not quite, but close to baby anaconda, green anaconda. And you know they were worried about us getting bit. Well, I've dealt with snakes a lot, so I moved the thing, and I got bit 3 times by it, which for me was a great memory, and also came away with some great images. So you know the dart frogs getting down low for tarantulas, poison dart frogs. I love those. I love the challenge of finding those subjects and walking around in the forest, even though it's humid and you know at times it can be buggy. But the humidity level varies so much. This trip was a little humid, but it wasn't by any stretch the most humid that I've had in that forest on that walk. But I think those were special moments for me. And you know, I don't know about you, Don, but when I'm looking through my Lightroom as I upload images and I'm culling them and I'm looking through, I always go, oh, I thought I might have got a good shot of that, but I didn't realize I got that good a shot, you know? So what were some of the shots that stood out to you that we'll share with people here, but you want to tell a little bit about getting the shot and what it took. And so what are a couple of your images that really jump out at you?
You know, I don't do a lot of reptile photography. I think one of the things that I was really impressed with was let me make sure I have the right name of this frog. It was a toad, actually. It was a crested forest toad. But we
Yes.
had this beautiful little setting, and I have to give it to Lee. I mean, he's the one that's always he likes these macro photos, right? So he's always thinking about this, you know, where these animals are. And you know, we happened to find this toad on a leaf that actually had green and orange and yellow. It had some really pretty colors on it. So it made for a really interesting photo. That was one that, as I went back through, I really liked. I agree with you that the capuchin was really cool. It didn't have a great background. It was kind of a busy background behind that monkey, but he just sat there and stared at us, looking out from the jungle. And then I think right about the same time, one of the squirrel monkeys had actually just laid down on a branch and he's like
Oh yeah.
hanging over the side of this branch. And I just think
Yes.
like the monkeys are just so animated and they just have so much personality. And I think it's fun to capture those aspects of seeing these animals down there. We also saw a pygmy or the marmoset, the pygmy
Oh
marmoset monkey.
yes. Yeah.
And that's the smallest true monkey in the world. So I think that was pretty special too. And to
That
have him
is,
hanging there,
I'll tell you, I've seen it on every trip, and the pygmy marmoset is never any less incredible to see, just for that very fact that you said it's the world's smallest primate. So for me, you never go, ah, oh, it's a pygmy marmoset. Every time you're like, oh my gosh, that's so adorable. Come give me a hug and let me get your shot.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a
And
good trip.
I think, like you said, when people ask me about the trip, I always mention releasing those turtles. I mean, it's just,
Mm.
that's one of the things that I really like about this trip in particular is that yes, we are there to add new birds to people's life list. We're there to get phenomenal photographs, but we combine it with a lot of other things during the trip too. We meet with local villages, we meet kids, we donate some supplies for schools. We heard this year from one of the I guess I think he was a teenager, but he's actually been so impressed with the tours that have come through that he actually went and he became certified, went to school to become a guide. And that's actually what he's pursuing now. So it's actually made an impact on his life. So to see some of those things, the conservation efforts that some of these small villages are doing, as Lee, you mentioned already that the government does give some of these villages they'll actually fund them to help preserve some of the open space. So it's not like here in the US where we have a lot of funding for national parks to designate land and preserve it for perpetuity. Down there, they actually have, they kind of rely on some of these locals to do that for them to help save some of this land. And as a result, some of these animals are really benefiting from it. We mentioned the turtles already. We saw a toucan that was being cared for by a local village. It was a wild toucan, but it had an injured wing. Last year, we had that uakari that was in that situation, another animal that's endangered. So it's really fascinating to see not just the animals themselves, but to see what that region really is doing from a conservation effort and how those villages live in such a remote area.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. When you see the villagers when they're out fishing or they're just, or they've got one dugout canoe sitting on top of another dugout canoe and they're transporting their canoe to get to more remote areas and have a smaller, more maneuverable boat. It does have a lot of culture there. Everything you and I experience, everything from the big city of Lima. I know, we have that first day where you and I walked around town and had to buy some great alpaca clothing and checking out the mall on the cliff at the beach. I mean, for an
I
urban
helped Lee
area, that's a
spend some
great
money.
experience. Huh?
I helped Lee spend some money.
Yes, yes. You were awesome at helping model and hold up stuff for my wife to pick out her best selections. But yeah, and that was a fun day. I really enjoy Lima as a big city. We stay in a nice area. The hotel is lovely, great food there. But as we head out, we then get a flight to Iquitos. And on a lot of trips, we leave very early to do a hike in the White Sand Forest. And this time, because of flight schedules and stuff, we couldn't get out early. So what it meant was we actually instead of catching the boat in Nauta, we caught it in Iquitos. And I think one fun thing that we got to do a little better on that trip was going in and buying school supplies for the kids in the remote area. And I always think that was a lot of fun to get to go in and select some of those things. And as you said, take it to the villages. Plus, that's where some of the local ladies wanted to touch my beard. So that was a highlight of the trip for me too.
Lee's getting free gifts from women for admiring his beard.
Sold my soul for a snake souvenir, didn't I? Oh my
But
gosh.
like, but that's even though there's a language barrier for some people, they speak Spanish there, but a lot of these villages still have their native dialects. So
Yeah.
it's not Spanish. It might be a version of it, but we can't understand them. They can't understand us. Our guides certainly play go between for us. But there's all these, I mean, their smiles and they're really nice. They just are really, really super sweet people down in that area.
Friendly, welcoming. Yeah.
Something else I was just, as I'm looking through some of these photos, another bird that I think our group like really enjoyed were the black collared hawks,
Yeah.
because they had that very distinct sound, so you could hear it, and
Which
it
you
became
learned and
kind of
did pretty well.
a right. I mean, our group, I think, was really enjoying those over the course of the week of oh, there's our buddy again. It's
Yes, yeah, that was a lot of fun. One thing too, when we get on the riverboat, a lot of people think riverboat, you're on this, the Amazon, it's this huge river, but the reality is that's just our base. That's what we base out of. And we get on these little skiffs that, normally we'll have anywhere from 6 to 11 people. This trip was a little smaller. The people on this trip got a really great experience in the sense of they have no idea, we had such a small group, you could shoot in any direction without any kind of anybody's head normally getting in the way. But what I love, when we get out on the skiffs, is how we go up these little tributaries. In fact, sometimes we have to duck and let branches go over our head, and it makes you almost feel like you're exploring in ways. You're going where so few people get to go, that it just takes you back in time for me, when people really were exploring this region and most other people had no idea what it was like. But we're doing that in the pursuit of images. They were doing that in the name of exploration. But each day we go out, and there's animals I photographed before, but like sometimes you come away with your favorite particular image. And I got an image of the white-lined bat this time with what I call, and I'll show that now, raking light coming across, so it has a dark background and a part of the bat is highlighted. And that for me was a nice photographic experience, because no matter how many times you photograph something, professional photographers will photograph anything. Dawn and I are professional wildlife, landscape. I do night sky. Dawn does night sky, macro. We like to photograph it all. But you get some people that, for some reason, they don't want to photograph the common or the ordinary. They say, well, I photographed that before. But Dawn and I, we're both of the mindset, we're always looking for a better image, or the light's different, or the setting is different, or the background's different. And so here's a bat that I've seen every trip multiple times, and it wasn't until my 7th trip that I actually got my favorite image of it. And that's one of the things I like about going out on workshops and seeing sometimes the same species over and over. It's never the same, is it, Dawn?
No, and that's, like I said, that was one of the biggest surprises of this trip, that it really was quite different from last year, even though we were in the same vicinity. One of the things, as I'm looking through photos, as you were thinking about some of your favorite photos as a photographer, not just so much, I mean, yeah, a lot of these animals are new for me, right? So I want to have documentary photos. So, a lot of them are just, not something I would ever, probably couldn't sell and probably wouldn't publish or enter in a photo contest. But they represent a great moment, right? A great opportunity, something to remind me of what the experience was like. But there was one photograph that I took of a striated heron that I was really, really happy with. I love to photograph silhouettes. I love that type of photography. It's a little bit more dramatic, but we had this one striated heron sat up on top of this branch, with these backlit, close to sunset. So there's some clouds, some real humid looking clouds behind it, and it lifted its neck up and just it posed in such a way that its beak went straight up in the air, and it's just this unique perspective on that bird. And it's a little bit of a wider shot. It's not super close or anything, but I like that background, that silhouette. So those are the types of things too, and you can still do those, right, even from the skiffs that we were in.
Yep, yep, yep. Now, another unique experience on this trip that we do, one time, is we do basically a sunset and a night tour. And our local guides, it's just amazing. I mean, the local guides actually grow up in the Amazon, and they both Dawn and I are good at spotting wildlife and the things these guys see, because they're used to what they're looking for. Whereas, even after 7 times, there's still things that I'm not that familiar with down there. Like Dawn mentioned, we had a tamandu, which is an arboreal anteater. We didn't get pictures of it, but it was the first time we ever saw it. And it was just awesome, loping up this branch, about 60 feet up in a tree. And most people don't realize that there are arboreal anteaters. But we get a lot of unique things. And on our night trip, another reptile highlight for me was Caesar spotting or grabbing a baby
Baby
Yakari
Cayman.
caiman. Oh my gosh. And
I
we've got a little
still don't
video
know
clip
how
and
he saw that. I mean,
I,
it was so tiny. And I assume it had something to do with the eyes. And like you
yeah,
said,
reflective
just
lighting.
like in the areas that we're familiar with, you know what's out of place. You know what's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do not know. And it was just sitting on top of these lilies that were floating on top of the water. And he's like, there's a caiman down there. And we're like, what?
And to get to hold it, oh my gosh, that was so adorable, man. Yeah, yeah. We'll show a little video clip of that here now. And then we also had a Putu at night, and our guides found us some really nice stuff when we go out on those night excursions. So it's a fun experience being on a tributary to the Amazon at night, seeing things and hearing things that you wouldn't normally get to see or hear otherwise. So for me, the night thing is always, it's very different every year. We never know what we're going to find, and like the Putu we see a lot of the times, but this time we could actually put a flashlight on it and get some nice images of it, which is really pretty tough to do because they're often so high up. So this was another one. I like photographing birds in flight too, and the jacanas, the wattled jacanas, they have this beautiful. Their primaries and secondaries are kind of yellowish with this brown edging, and so when they fly, they're pretty dramatic looking. But they don't fly generally a really long way, so it's always kind of a challenge. But I came away with a couple of images that I really like of that. What about you? What are some things that? What are some other images that jump out at you that you captured this trip?
It's funny that you say the jacana. I still do not. I know I said several times. I'm like, wait, no, I'm trying to get this bird in flight, and you see them all over the place, but they're hard to photograph in flight. They're erratic. They don't give you much notice. I still don't think I have one that I'm really happy with.
Yeah.
You're not in the right position, not flying the right direction, that kind of thing. Other photographs that I was mentioning to you earlier that I took a lot of cloud photographs. We saw some really interesting, even though we didn't have rain on us at any point during this trip, we actually saw quite a few thunderheads. And because of the humidity in the air, it creates these really amazing clouds. And there were just some beautiful opportunities. There was one time we were coming back to the boat at night. Remember the rain? There was a rainbow kind of
Yes.
dropping
Oh
right
yeah.
in over the boat. That was a real pretty scene.
That
We
was
had
cool.
another sunset, another night that actually had a smiley face in the clouds.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
so, and that's something that I'm always encouraging people when they go to these places. Yes, we are there for the birds and the wildlife, but don't forget to photograph all the other things happening too. The what's happening on the boat, the things that we see, the sunsets, the villagers, the kids that are making little trinkets or playing soccer in some of these towns. I know last year there was a frog behind the bathroom door that I photographed last year. This year, that same bathroom had it was it was a large bug of some sort. I don't remember exactly what kind of, not a, it'll pop in my head, but it was a fairly large bug. So you just really never know what you're going to see around the next corner.
Yeah, the diversity. In fact, the first time ever in my life, I finally found an ant mimic fly. Got a really nice shot of that, which is something unusual. Of course, because I'm doing macro up close, I tend to be lingering a little bit behind the group. So sometimes I see things, and then they're like, hey, I'll be like, hey, I got this back here. And sometimes they want to come back and photograph it. And sometimes you can tell they're like, they've got something else to focus on because there's so much out there. But that was kind of a nice highlight for me, was seeing that. And we had, I think it was at least three, maybe four situations where um, spiders had been paralyzed by wasps. So one of them was a Brazilian wandering spider, which is a very dangerous. I mean, can be quite fatal if you get bit by it. And I thought, man, and they're normally very fast, so I was a little wary about getting people too close to photograph it. And suddenly I was like, man, this spider is really still. And then a wasp flew in, walking around. I thought, aha, it's been paralyzed. And what often happens is these wasps will drag this spider to a hole or a cavity or something. They lay an egg on it. And when the egg hatches, the larva begins to eat the spider, and the spider's still alive. It's only been paralyzed. So it gets eaten alive, which is a really horrible thought. But by golly, it made for some great images while we were out there. So that was kind of cool. You see it every now and then, but to see like three or four different occurrences, that was pretty cool. And of course, the world's largest tarantula, the Goliath bird eating tarantula. I think I've had that on every trip. So that's kind of a special experience from a macro world as well, you know. But we often, and then like this time, we also had that common Paraki sitting out in the open during the day with a nice background. Those can often be hard to get a shot of perched on a branch. You know, in the US, they're only found like in South Texas, and most times they're on the ground. So to have it on a branch is kind of a cool thing too. You know, so what are some other things from the tributaries that jumped out at you that you're able to get some nice shots of?
Well, I think we had the Valacious, I think that was the name of it, the Valacious Jays. And I don't
Oh
think, I wouldn't
yes,
say I captured any spectacular photos of them, but they are beautiful birds. I mean, it's not just a violet color, but it's a really like a soft, smoky violet color. They were really interesting to see. Um, the other thing that as I'm kind of glancing through some of my photos here, one of the birds that I enjoy seeing, and I don't think they're terribly rare down there, are the red-capped cardinals.
oh
And
yeah.
part of the reason is that you get this burst of red against this green background.
It's
I
beautiful.
think they make for really, and they are pretty tolerant of us being around them, so you can get some pretty nice photos of them. The
How
anis,
about
I think, are a lot of fun to
which
photograph.
ones?
What was that?
Which ones did you just
The
say?
anis.
Oh yes, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, they're actually, and again, they're kind of like magpies here in Colorado. They're pretty um prolific down there. You see them a lot, but they're not easy to
they're
photograph.
not
And
easy
they're
to do.
beautiful birds.
They
They're
are.
kind of like a crow where they have these dark, dark black feathers, but they have a lot of iridescence on them.
I
And
got a
again,
shot
against
in
that.
flight with you can see on the scapulars with that green iridescent edging to the black, and it's so hard to see that. It has to be the right light angle, and like you said, while they're everywhere, getting a great image of one is not easy. They're not uber cooperative. Just like another bird that we see not a ton of, but we see them enough, and they're very big, but they are so aggravating. The horned screamer, right? The southern horned screamer. And you hear them because they're so loud. They're like the most obnoxious pain in the butt bird. But we did have some really nice photographic opportunities with them, didn't we?
Yeah, the horned screamers. I think this trip definitely more so than last year's. I mean, we had them down by water level. We had them actually
Yeah.
sitting in trees. We definitely learned, we talk about how the more you understand animal behavior, the more you can be prepared for an action photo to capture. And one of the things that we observed was that the horned screamers were always in pairs. So if we saw one, we knew there was going to be another one nearby somewhere. So often we would miss the photograph with the first one, but we could capture the second one. And because we saw a lot of them this year, we really were able to pick up on that behavior and really improve some photo opportunities with them. The other one that I think is a gorgeous bird that I like to photograph down there are the yellow rump caciques. They have this beautiful blue eye, this like turquoise blue eye with that bright yellow feathers against the black. And they have these really interesting nests. So again, it's something
Yeah.
that we'll sit and wait with them, and you wait for them to fly in, you wait for them to kind of poke their heads out, and you can get some photos of them in flight.
The Oriole blackbirds, I end up with a couple of really nice images. That's a beautiful bird. And the colors, on a lot of things are so spectacular. But then there's cuteness, which is like you talked about the sloths. While we didn't have that many, we did have that one that was such out in the open. It was foraging, eating, and then it crawled down the trunk a little bit, and ended up getting some really nice shots because of the expression and the legs, when it was moving around, it wasn't all bunched up like you often see, so the reality is sometimes all it takes is one of them to be cooperative for you to get some really nice shots. Yeah, you may see seven or eight. Sometimes you see a sloth and it's just in a sleeping sloth ball of nothingness. It's just like, yeah, I'm not doing anything. But then sometimes you get them out in the open real nice and get some good images too. So we also had some nice up close experiences with it.
The other one that there's a tern that we see a lot, the large billed terns.
Yes.
They're another one that I think they can really make for, again, even though they're common, they're not common here in the US. So they
Right.
make for a really good subject. You see them a lot down there. They're a little bit of a larger bird, so they can be a little bit easier to photograph, especially since they're white against a darker background. So those, we had a lot of, I think we had some good opportunities with them this year.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You know, overall, the diversity and the number of images I came away with that I was happy were quite high. And, you know, if you're on the birding skiff, you always know they're going to produce over 300 species of birds. I think they were close to 300 this year. I don't remember
We
if they
had 295 this year. Last year we had
295.
320.
Yeah, 320.
So it's
So,
always, yeah, right around 300.
yeah, right
And
around
usually what I
300.
do when people ask me, they're like, well, is that a lot? And like, so the way that I put it in perspective is that Rocky Mountain National Park here in Colorado has only recorded 280 birds ever. I mean,
Ever.
that's the life list for Rocky Mountain National Park in their documentation. And we see that many birds or more. We're actually seeing more in a 10-day window down on this trip.
Yeah, if you've seen 700 species in what we call the American Birding Association area, that's considered a lot. That's a big deal. So yeah, and to see 700 in a year in the AB area is a phenomenal accomplishment. So to get 300 or so birds in a short trip like that is pretty incredible. You know, I agree. It's and you know the photography boat we're not counting or keeping a list, but the overall list is always very impressive. And even in the photography boat, we still get to see a lot of the rare and unusual birds. So for me, you know, while you and I aren't necessarily worried about how many we see, we're looking for great photographic opportunities. The diversity, like this was my first trip to see bullet ants, which is something I'd really wanted to see in photographs. So that was kind of nice. And that's the fun thing about this trip. You know, I tell everybody if you look at the price and what you get to experience, I think this is one of the best value trips that Wildside offers because the group is a little larger, but we all split up on skiffs. So it never feels overwhelmingly large. Maybe when you're getting through the airport and we got a big group of people to check in. But other than that, the group size, it lends to a very fun dynamic at dinner, you know, when you change seats and get to know a lot of people. And you know, and then when the staff on board the ship, oh my gosh. I mean, I know Dawn would say this with me. One of the highlights for me is when they're playing music. I mean, they are phenomenal musicians. We're talking about the bartender and the tour director, you know, I mean, everything. So many of them play instruments and sing and Victor, you know, the boat guys and the naturalists, they're playing instruments and it's really pretty amazing experience, isn't it?
Yeah, the crew does just they so take care of us. I know one of the things I had a couple of things that I needed to finish and try and we're in the Amazon. You don't have a lot of internet signal, but our the guy that was kind of in charge of service for us, making sure we had what we needed. I mean, he was phenomenal. He's like, use my phone, and that's not standard. I'm not, and I didn't expect that of him, but he wanted to make sure that I had what I needed. If we needed a drink, they were on top of it. If we needed, certain dietary things for our guests, they were on top of it. They had, they made sure everybody was comfortable. It just they really go above and beyond in making sure that the team is there to answer the questions and get what everybody needs while they're there on the boat.
They know me so well. They just bring my diet, my Coke Zero. Boom, Lee, here's your Coke Zero. I never even have to ask, he just knows. Yeah, they're pretty incredible. One thing about this Amazon Riverboat excursion is, Wildside's been offering it for quite a while. And we are the only company, photographic company. Okay. There's a birding company that does it, but we are the only photographic company that reserves the entire boat. And what that means is you aren't beholden to someone else's itinerary or desires. He told me, talking with the local guides, nobody else goes out as early as we do. Nobody else stays out as late as we do. Nobody else stays out as long as we do. Most trips, they don't even go out until after breakfast. We're going out, before we have our full breakfast. They even give us a little snack pre-departure early in the morning and then fix us a breakfast. I mean, you will not go hungry and you got really good food on this ship. But if you want, the most bang for your buck, a Wildside Nature Tours, Peruvian Amazon Riverboat Adventure is a great way to go because we make sure you get every single second that you possibly can out on the Amazon. A lot of people want to sit back on the boat a lot. Well, why are you spending money to go? You can sit in your chair at home, right? Get out and explore when you're out in the field. So, it's a great experience. I know, for both Dawn and I, I grew up never dreaming of being on the Amazon. I don't know about Dawn, but I certainly never
Same,
thought I'd
no,
be on the
same here.
Amazon. So when you get to see pink river dolphins surfacing, and you talk about a photographic challenge, right? Um, the river dolphins, because the water's so dark, you can't really anticipate. It's hard to. But seeing both gray and pink river dolphins, anacondas, bats, monkeys, I mean, tamandus, arboreal anteaters, get the diversity in such a short time period, nesting macaws, parrots, and to hear them calling as they fly over. I mean, it's a true South American Amazon experience that is memorable and photographically rewarding. And I think Dawn's going next year in 2025. Kevin will be back in the Amazon. He's had his knee surgeries. He's ready to go. He's ready to get back on some boats and do some of these kind of trips. So Don, how would you describe for you the overall experience from the boat to the manatee rescue center to the walks? Kind of give people an overarching picture of what it's like for you as you go as a photographer.
Well, and I think I kind of mentioned it earlier that it's, I like the mix of things. I mean, I love being out in the skiffs, out looking for things every day. That's the kind of the highlight and the goal of each and every day. But it's intermixed with all these other opportunities to learn about the area, to learn about the villages, to learn about the different conservation efforts, to learn about we go to the towns of Pukasana where we take these boat rides, and it's just now all of a sudden we're experiencing shorebirds. And I have a fascination with pelicans, so I was able to add Peruvian pelicans to my collection of photos, so that I now have three sets of pelican photos, pelican species. It just is it again, and I hate to sound repetitive, but it really is so diverse and such an opportunity to experience something that you've learned about in books over the years when you're going through school, and to have that experience firsthand of what it's like down there, not just from the wildlife and the natural world experience, but from the culture that's down there too. It's and with such a great crew. I mean, as we were just saying, with the boat crew, just really make sure that we are well taken care of.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're right. That a lot of times when you fly back to the main city, people kind of, oh, the trip's over and everything. But that last day that we spend at Pukasana and on the beach is a highlight for me as well. I could go back there and spend 3 days in that little town because the light, every experience is different on that little boat ride. I mean, what are we out, an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe? And this year we had a special treat, a sea otter, which Kevin had once. It was the first time for myself and Dawn to have one in Peru. And it's not something that's very common there. So that was a big highlight. But
It was actually called a marine otter. And
yeah,
I did a
marine
little bit of
otters.
reading about them. They're actually quite a bit smaller than the sea
Yeah,
otters. They look very similar,
but they're
but they're
not the same
smaller.
species. No, they're very cool. So and that was right in the marina amongst the boats and everything. So, and Inca terns, which are just an absolutely drop dead beautiful bird, beautiful cormorants, sea lions. So that last day is every bit as thrilling to me as when you're out on the Amazon, and lots of great photographic opportunities. I know it produces some of my highest number of images in a day while we're down in Peru. So yeah, that's definitely a highlight and a great experience overall. So I think you know what I like too is, you don't see the same stuff every single trip. So, like, we didn't see Watson, which we often see on trips, but that's what makes the Amazon so interesting is the diversity, the challenges on spotting things, like where we often go see the Watson, the grasses were thicker. So, there are some years we can't even get down a tributary that we've gone down 3 or 4 times. So, people always want to know exactly where we're going. Like, no, you don't understand. This is the Amazon. It's not predictable. Water levels vary, vegetation levels vary. One year we had kids in a boat that pulled up next to us, and they'd caught, I think, 12 different species of fish, and we actually gave them basically a tip for showing us all the different species of fish they had, and
Including piranhas.
including piranhas. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we go see the shaman, and she teaches us about the forest medicine and how she treats people, and you learn about all kinds of interesting aspects to the culture. So this trip really is a great one for both natural world, cultural world, beach, Amazon, jungle, a little bit of everything. And then to cap it off, as you're on your way to the airport at Iquitos, we go by the Manatee Rescue Center, which is in partnership with the Dallas World Aquarium. And I just went up with my grandkids there the other day to the Dallas World Aquarium. And as I walked around, they have this incredible experience with mammals, birds, reptiles. And I bet 80% of what they had in there, I was like, we saw that, we saw that. And there was a lady behind me with my kids, and she goes, you have the best guide, don't you? And my daughter was like, yep, my dad was just there. So I was showing them pictures of me holding the anaconda and all that. And I'm like, most people only get to experience this in zoos and museums and aquariums. But when you go on this trip, you're experiencing it firsthand. And I think that's a special aspect. So if you'd like to join Kevin and Dawn in 2025, again, for the price of this trip, and I think right now, the cabin pricing varies. So we don't have a set price because the cabin prices varies. It starts at $6,500. Well, when you look at the length of this trip and what you get to do, that's a real bargain. Yeah, there's higher priced cabins for suites and things like that. So you can always look into that if you want a little more room. But I think for the dollar spent, this is one of the best values. So I know Dawn, Kevin would love to have you. Dawn, what would you like to say to folks that are thinking about joining us in 2025?
I would definitely, I think there's so many people. When I was going last year, so many people are like, "Oh, you're going to Amazon. Oh, you're going to Brazil. You're not going to Peru." I'm like, "No, I know where I'm going. I'm going to Peru." I mean, this is where the confluence of two rivers come together to form the beginning of the Amazon River. I mean, this is such an important habitat and ecosystem in South America, and to have the opportunity to experience it both with a camera, with guides that have grown up in the area. I mean, it really is, many of the Wildside trips are, a trip of a lifetime, but this is a really unique one that I don't think a lot of places offer this type of opportunity. We have fun groups, we have amazing people that just know such a wealth of information about birds and the other animals of the area. So I hope you can join us next year. I'm sure it will be yet another different experience compared to the last 2 years.
Yeah, that is a special moment. They take the skiffs right in the middle where the Marañón and the Uruguay come together. That's those two rivers. And you're sitting there knowing that in many ways, this is where the Amazon kind of begins. And you're in this, relatively small boat compared to the size of the river. And you just feel that water rushing by. And quite often there's dolphins and the guides are telling you about where you're at. And it's pretty mind blowing to think, what, I actually in my lifetime got to go to that exact point and experience it. And you will not be disappointed. This is one of those trips. In fact, one of our regular clients, Terry, who's been with me in North America, in South America, Central America, the Galapagos, Terry's been a lot. And she told us several times in the boat that this was her favorite trip. And I thought that was awesome because when I look at all the different places Terry's traveled, that says a lot that was her favorite trip. So guys, don't wait. 2025, again, great pricing, a full experience. We booked the entire boat, so you don't have to worry about what some other groups may or may not want to do. Everything is driven by our desires, and the guides tell us they love guiding for us because they get to go out and experience their own jungle and their own rivers more than they do with any of the other groups that come out there. So thanks for watching. Again, I'm going to have links down below. Dawn, if they'd like to see some more of your images, I'm going to put some of your images and my images in a slideshow at the end of this video. So stick around, folks, if you'd like to watch a slideshow of our images. But Dawn, if they want to see some other images of yours from this trip and others, what website would they go to?
You can go to dawnwilsonphotography.com. So that's DAWNWILSON photography.com. And on there, under the blog, which is under the about information, you can see my trip report that has some additional photographs from this trip as well.
Great. Guys, I'm going to put that down below in the description. If you want to see some more of my images, I've got a album on my Smug Mug. I also have my webpage. I'll put those down below. And then stick around here when we finish. We're going to play that slideshow. Thanks for watching. Join us on the Amazon in 2025.
Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to go off and take some pictures of sea lions and mockingbirds and whatever else I can find. So please be sure to join us on a trip in the future.